On odd-numbered Tuesdays, Mr. Ardan's tie did not match the weather. This was how Leo measured the secret life of his physics teacher. Rain outside and sunflowers at his throat. Heat wave out on the track and a pattern of tiny umbrellas bobbing at his collar. Leo made a game of it, and the game kept his brain from rattling in the empty places where answers to quadratic equations should have been. That Tuesday, the sky over Westburn High was a gray lid, the kind that flattens sound. Mr. Ardan's tie was pale blue, embroidered with tiny silver moons. When the bell rang and the last of his classmates surged toward the hallway, Leo stayed behind, pretending to erase the whiteboard with the ferocity of a martyr. "Homework is numbers 2 through 9, Mr. Ardan said, gathering a stack of quizzes. His voice always sounded like it had been ironed smooth. "You can round significant figures, but do not round your integrity." Leo swung the eraser like a sword. "I forgot my water bottle." "It's on your desk," Mr. Ardan said without looking up. "Also your integrity." Leo laughed, the small, loyal kind of laugh you give to a teacher who lets you survive. Then he made the mistake of glancing toward the back of the lab. There, past the periodic table and the mangled Van de Graaff generator, stood a tall cabinet he had never seen before. It wasn't the kind of thing you overlooked. Black oak, polished until it reflected the ceiling lights, brass hinges like vertebrae, a glass door at the top etched with a single circle so thin it could have been a ghost of chalk. Leo would have sworn the space had held a skeleton on a rolling stand yesterday. Your basic academic skeleton, eternally shrugging, but now the cabinet stood there like a hush. "New furniture?" Leo asked too casually. Mr. Ardan didn't answer. He had stilled with one hand on a drawer, fingers pressed flat as if feeling the pulse of the wood. "You should go," he said after a beat. "I have a meeting." Leo should have gone. He should have gathered his water bottle and his dignity and left the room to be ordinary without him. Instead, he crossed to the back of the lab and put his hand on the cabinet's handle. It was warm. "Don't," Mr. Ardan said, but the word arrived in the room too late to be useful. It bumped into the past tense and fell. The cabinet door opened on air that smelled faintly of cardamom and solder. The shelves inside had been rearranged around an absence. Leather straps formed a cradle for a device that was neither clock nor compass but argued with both. Rings nested within rings, each scribed with hair-thin marks, not runes, not numbers. Something in between, like the alphabet of a tide. Copper wires braided outward into blocks of black stone. The whole thing hummed with the impolite confidence of a refrigerator in a quiet kitchen. "Whoa," Leo breathed. "What is it?" "An orrery," Mr. Ardan said. He had come to stand beside Leo, though Leo hadn't heard him cross the room. "Of a sort." "Orrery," Leo repeated, tasting the word. "Like planets. Like doors," Mr. Ardan said softly. On the glass, the single etched circle brightened a fraction, as if someone had smudged a thumb across the idea of light. A dot moved along its rim with the patient gravity of a second-hand learning a new job. "Please step back," Mr. Ardan said. His voice had lost its ironed quality, it came in creases now. "It reacts to proximity." Leo didn't know whether he stepped back. His body felt mislabeled, as if someone had rearranged the index. He reached out. He was the kind of idiot who touched stoves to confirm their warnings, and his fingers brushed the knurled edge of the outer ring. Everything in the room tightened by a degree. The inscribed marks along the ring's edge woke in sequence, blinking themselves into a phrase Leo couldn't read but could nearly hear. The dot on the etched glass paused, then drifted inward like a moon making up its mind. Mr. Ardan swore, not in English. Okay, Leo said, maybe we shut it off. I can't, Mr. Ardan said, and his face had altered into a map that no longer matched the classroom. Not while it's reading you. Reading me? Leo said faintly. I'm not even legible. Everyone is legible to something, Mr. Ardan said. He reached for the device, stopped, reached again. The leather straps tightened as if deciding to be alive. What does it read? Leo asked, because he was still talking, because talking is the human superstition that you can convince reality to behave with good grammar. Resonance, Mr. Ardan said. The pattern under the pattern. Some people carry a note that fits the old machines. Old machines, Leo repeated. He was good at repeating, it kept Panic from using all his air. The dog reached a tiny triangle that had not been present a moment ago. The rings clicked once, a sound like a safe consenting to be a door. Inside the cabinet, the air thickened, not hot, exactly, but dense with attention. The etched circle on the glass brightened from ghost to moon. What are you doing in here, Ardan? A voice called from the hallway, the contralto of Vice Principal Greaves. The kind of voice that expects compliance from shoes. The door handle rattled. Mr. Ardan did something with his eyes that could have been prayer or profanity. Greaves, he whispered. Of all possible observers, the device chimed. Not metal. A sound like rain beginning on a tin roof in another country. The cabinet's back developed a seam. Leo stared at the seam. If you've never seen depth wrong-foot a wall, it's difficult to describe. It wasn't a crack. It was a declaration. The seam widened to the width of a hand, then two. Behind it was not plaster, not cinder block, not the calculus of school maintenance. Behind it was a darkness that looked woven. As the seam yawned, the darkness developed texture, the nap of velvet you can feel without your fingers. Close. Leo managed. Can't, Mr. Ardan said through his teeth. It's keyed. To you. The lab door banged open. Ardan, we have 3 buses waiting. Vice Principal Greaves strode in, saw the cabinet, and stopped, her posture performing a U-turn. What is that? A teaching aid, Mr. Ardan said, with the tonal flatness of a man attempting to wave a tidal wave through. Greaves took 2 brisk steps and peered into the cabinet. She frowned at the seam. Is that school property? The seam pulsed like a vein. Something else pulsed in Leo, a recognition he refused to name. He felt, bizarrely, called. The sensation was not one of being chosen, it was one of being found unhidden. Greaves leaned closer. If that is a safety hazard. The seam inhaled. There are moments when a room negotiates with physics and loses. Papers lifted from tables and flew as if they'd been waiting for an excuse. The posters lifted and flapped, the noble gases doing a ragged impression of a flock. Leo's feet left the floor for a fraction that felt like a lifetime. Mr. Ardan grabbed the cabinet with one hand and Leo's wrist with the other and swore again in a sensible language. Rules, Mr. Ardan said. His voice was calm, which is how you know Panic has agreed to step outside while it smokes. If you cross, do not tell anyone your full name. Do not eat the first food offered to you. If a person offers to carry your shadow, refuse. Politely. These are fairy tale rules, Leo said, and his voice sounded like someone else's voicemail. All the good science started as fairy tales, Mr. Ardan said. Leo. The suction surged. Greaves yelped and grabbed a lab stool. The stool skidded grudgingly toward the cabinet. What is happening? She shrieked, the kind of shriek that turns adults into the children they never stop being. Threshold pressure, Mr. Ardan said, because even now he was a teacher. The leather strap around the device slithered down and wrapped Leo's forearm above his wrist. It did not bite. It anchored. "Let go," Leo said uselessly to a room whose verbs no longer respected his manners. "I won't," Mr. Ardan said, and his grip tightened on Leo's wrist. Leo had a dizzy, useless thought. He's stronger than he looks. Then the seam widened to the size of a person and chose a person. He fell forward, not down. Forward, the way you fall when you remember a word you needed a year ago. Mr. Arden's hand slipped. Greaves shouted something that could have been liability or librarian. Leo hoped it was the latter. The leather strap tugged. The seam accepted him the way water accepts a thrown coin. For a moment there was only texture. The knot dark had a feel to it, like running through a curtain of moth wings. Sound thinned to strings. Then something in the world re-knotted. Leo landed on his hands and knees on a surface that yielded like old cork and smelled faintly of oranges and rain. He pushed himself upright, and the first thing he saw was a sky too close. Not low, near, a blue you could learn to play by ear. The second thing he saw was a building made entirely of doors. The building rose like a ship's prow, every story another collage of door frames in 100 styles, none of them matching, all of them convincing. The third thing he saw was that the strap around his arm was now a bracelet. The device curled itself into something like a cuff, its rings nested but not asleep. The etched marks along the outer rim moved as if pleasantly occupied. "Well," said someone, "you're early." The voice came from a person perched on a railing that had not decided whether it wanted to be a railing or a bench. They wore a long coat made of mismatched fabric, polished tweed, oilskin, a square of something like sailcloth with a compass rose stubbornly stitched by hand. Their hair looked like the wind had apologized mid-conversation. Their face had the unbothered generosity of someone who knows every shortcut but walks the long way so their friends can catch up. "I'm early?" Leo said, thankful to discover his voice could still rotate. "By a decade, give or take," the person said cheerfully. "But it's fine. The city adores a surprise." "What city?" Leo asked. The person swept an arm, coat fluttering like an opinion. "Harrowmark," they said. "Also called the Interleaf. Also called that place with too many doors. I am Cael. I carry lost things home if they behave. And you are?" "Someone whose teacher likes breaking his promises." Leo blinked. "You know Mr. Ardan?" "No is generous," Cael said. "I owe him a drink for an old rescue and a half apology for most of the rest. He told me the hinge might decide on a kid within the year." "He didn't say Tuesday." "Hinge," Leo said, looking down at the bracelet. The outer ring, the one with the tiny unreadable marks, twitched as if amused. "Don't call it hinge out loud unless you want attention," Cael said. "Doors get proprietary. They prefer euphemisms. Threshold engine. Liminal orrery. Bracelet that misbehaves." "I didn't mean to," Leo began. "No one does," Cael said. "When has that mattered to a good story?" Between buildings the alleys curved like sentences. People moved through them with the confident care of those who have learned which cobblestones tell the truth. Some wore clothes from any century Leo could name and several he couldn't. A woman with a sergeant's posture led a tethered creature that looked like a greyhound made of paper, its ears stamped with old library dates. In a courtyard, a circle of kids took turns stepping through a standing frame made of gates. Each time a different smell washed out: cinnamon, snow, gasoline, the after-rain smell of hot stone. Leo's heart steadied into a rhythm that belonged here. The bracelet warmed his skin, not in warning but the way a pocket warms a stone you meant to keep anyway. He realized his palms were scraped. He realized he was grinning. He realized he was, in a way he couldn't defend, relieved. A bell rang in a tone Leo's bones filed under health. Cael hopped off the railing and landed with the grace of a slowed-down coin. Right, they said briskly. Introductory rules, abbreviated, because the keepers are already sniffing. Keepers? Leo said. Of order, Cael said. Of the official map. Of things that fit. They like to help, so long as your helping looks like they're helping, which is to say, not at all. If one offers to carry your shadow, say no. Your teacher told you that part, yes? He did, Leo said, chest tightening at the memory of Mr. Ardan's hand on his wrist. He said don't give anyone my full name, either. Correct. Names here are handles. Don't get picked up by yours unless you mean to be moved. Cael put 2 fingers to the bracelet, not touching, just letting its heat learn theirs. The outer ring ticked once. And don't put salt in your mouth unless you trust the person handing it to you. Binding, here. Why salt? Leo asked. Because it is old, Cael said simply. Old things can still do work, if you let them. They set off through the market. The stalls sold needful absurdities. A rack of paper umbrellas with weather forecasts written under the lacquer. A jar labeled maybe that contained a humming blur. A collection of keys whose teeth had been filed into letters. A woman sold silence in spools, thin wire that sang very softly when the light hit it. Leo reached toward a stack of little stone bowls, each carved with tiny dimples that made his scarlet palm itch, then snatched his hand back. Good instincts, Cael said. I don't know if they're mine, Leo said. I think the bracelet has opinions. It does, Cael said. Best to make friends with it before it decides you are the accessory. They turned into a lane of laundry lines hung with shirts from a dozen lives. Between 2 doors stood a man whose coat was mostly pockets. Cael, he said, you owe me a favor. I owe you 6, Cael said. This is Leo. The man's eyes flicked to the bracelet. His face did something like wince and like pity. Be quick, he said. The reclaimer walked the east stair 10 minutes ago. Noted, Cael said, and hurried Leo on. The reclaimer? Leo asked, because his curiosity had not yet learned useful restraint. One of the keepers with fancier rules, Cael said. He believes anything that crosses from one side to the other must be filed and eventually returned. He is not a villain, he simply loved a rule too much once and never recovered. They reached a building whose door did not match its frame. The door was painted the green of an old billiard table. The frame had been borrowed from a church and hadn't stopped blessing people on their way in. Cael rapped once. The door opened onto a room that was a library only on alternate Thursdays and the rest of the time a place where maps came to be forgiven. Inside stood a person in a robe made of old atlases stitched together, the outlines of continents marching along their sleeves. Their face was obscured by a veil of translucent vellum on which faded lines appeared and disappeared like memories that refused to stay categorized. You brought him, the person said. Their voice had notes of parchment and tide. Archivist, Cael said with a bow casual enough to be irreverent and respectful enough to be survival. This is Leo. The hinge likes him. His teacher is Mr. Ardan. The archivist stilled. The vellum shimmered. He promised, they said, the words flat with the weight of old paper. He promised we were finished with children. That wasn't a promise that could be kept, Cael said gently. And you know it. The archivist came close. They did not touch Leo. Their attention was enough to make the bracelet's rings hesitate. Put forth your arm, they said. Leo did, because all the choices that felt like refusals were suddenly heavy and the ones that felt like acceptance were light. The archivist bent, studying the etched marks. Their veil misted like breath on glass. Yes, they said softly. Not chosen. Tuned. Tuned to what? Leo asked. To the count, the archivist said, and then, because dawns are kind even when they are late, they added, you won't be the only one. The door behind them scraped. Cael's hand hovered near Leo's shoulder. The archivist turned, robe whispering. The person in the doorway wore gray so perfect it could have been an argument for fog. His hair had been parted with a measuring stick. His eyes were kind and inflexible. The air around him smelled faintly of ironed shirts and rain about to be scheduled. Reclaimer, Cael said lightly. We were just discussing forgiveness. The reclaimer's gaze landed on the bracelet. He exhaled, not unkindly. A student, he said. Again. Not by design, the archivist said. Not by yours, perhaps, the reclaimer said. He stepped inside and the room tidied itself in self-defense. He looked at Leo and, to Leo's surprise, smiled the way you smile at a neighbor's baby on a train. Names? Partial, Cael said quickly. This is Leo. Nothing else today. Prudent, the reclaimer said. Do you know what that is you wear? A mistake, Leo said, and it was not self-pity. It was an accurate map of how he felt in his skin. The reclaimer's smile tilted, thin as paper. Perhaps, or perhaps a correction. The Interleaf is made of those. He folded his hands. Come with me, Leo. We will make a record. We will return you. We will make your life neat. The bracelet warned, warning and welcome. Cael shifted a fraction closer. The archivist did not move at all. Paper rarely does until a hand commits. Leo looked at the reclaimer's neatness and felt, unreasonably, ungratefully, unwilling. Neat was what had been done to his report cards and his grief and every day since his father left without a goodbye longer than a grocery list. Neat had folded him until he creased. Not yet, Leo said. I just got here. The room took a breath. Cael's mouth made a pleased, appalled shape. The archivist's veil's faded lines brightened, then calmed. The reclaimer's eyes saddened. It looked like disappointment he had had practice wearing. Very well, he said. Then I will walk with you. 2 steps behind, to keep the count honest. He turned to the archivist. If you begin to spill, I will stop you. If we begin to spill, the archivist said, we shall build a bigger bowl. The reclaimer inclined his head, a concession disguised as manners. He stepped aside, making a path that was also a line. City tour? Cael said to Leo in a tone that meant run without running. Leo nodded. City tour. They stepped back into Harrowmark. The sky was still too near. The doors building still rose like a ship arguing with land. The bracelet sat warm and heavy, a friend with terms. Cael set a pace that was brisk without being chased. The reclaimer followed at the exact distance required to count as with rather than after. The archivist's room closed behind them with the soft finality of a book that intends to be opened again. Where to? Leo asked, because questions are the rope you throw ahead of you when the ground might be moving. The Reading Stair, Cael said. It's where people go when they're new. Or old. Or confused. You climb until your breath matches the city's, and then you understand one thing you didn't, and only one. Fair bargain. And then? Leo said. Then we talk about your teacher, Cael said, not unkindly. And the promise he made. And who, exactly, you are being tuned for. They turned into a street that curved like an afterthought. At its end rose a stair that went on longer than it should have. People climbed it like penance and like prayer. At the base stood a stall where a man sold cups of air flavored with lemon. Cael bought 2, handed one to Leo, and said, do not drink. It's for carrying. You'll know when. The reclaimer paused, watched, and did not interfere. That, Leo decided, would be his job, to keep not interfering as an art. He set his foot on the first stair and felt the bracelet's outer ring click once, as if the little etched marks were counting his steps. Above them, Harrowmark made a rustling sound that could have been wind and could have been pages. The sky breathed. Leo climbed. He did not look back. The Reading Stair didn't begin so much as remember itself under Leo's foot. From the street, it looked like an ordinary flight shouldered between two buildings that had been arguing about where the property line was since the city learned to have streets. But the first step rose a fraction higher than Leo's knee expected. The second dipped as if bowing. The third felt like an apology. Stairs with opinions. Don't count them, Cael said over his shoulder. It will only make you fight with numbers, and numbers will win in front of strangers. Leo gripped the paper cup of lemon air and climbed. The cup was lighter than it had any right to be. The bracelet warmed at the inside of his wrist, its outer ring rotating a degree when his foot found rhythm and stopping when it missed. 2 steps behind, the reclaimer ascended without touching the rail. He moved like an old law that had never needed to raise its voice. Around the 12th, no, around the next coil of stairs, the air thinned by half. Conversations that had been following them from the market fell away. Wind threaded itself through the stairwell and learned to be a whisper. Leo's lungs pulled and received less than they'd ordered. Now, Cael said, and Leo raised the cup to his mouth. He breathed the lemon air in as if it were a rule he agreed to. It hit the back of his throat like a new word you want to keep. The thinness eased. Along the stone, hairline cracks lit briefly, then went out, as if the stair were ticking off consent. What happens if you drink it early? Leo asked, lowering the cup. Nothing but embarrassment, Cael said. Which in Harrowmark is its own category of curse. And if you don't drink it at all? You faint charmingly, and the next person up the stair has to catch you. It becomes a meet cute. 2 marriages started here last year. Cael tossed a grin back over his shoulder. One of them to the city. They climbed. The stair widened suddenly around a landing where a bench had sprouted from the wall and a stray dog had taken the bench's presence personally. The dog was made of shadows stitched together with thread, eyes like polished slate. It eyed Leo with approval that felt like permission and disinterest that felt like autonomy. The reclaimer paused to scratch its ear. It accepted, then refused, then accepted again. What is that? Leo whispered. Someone's promise that they meant it, Cael said. When promises go feral and don't do harm, we let them settle. The city eats abstractions and keeps the good bones. Halfway up, Leo's knees began a quiet revolt. His breath found a shape. 4 steps in, hold, 3 steps out. The bracelet's thin outer ring synced to it, then led it, then deferred. His legs found a rhythm that wasn't stamina but agreement. The stair's hairline lights brightened a shade, the color of old book pages in sunlight. Don't look down, Cael said lightly. Not for fear, for scale. Why? Because scale here is a personal opinion. Leo didn't look down. He looked at the notch Cael indicated instead, a shallow bowl carved into the stone of the next landing, filled with something that wasn't water and wasn't not. It held the kind of stillness that exists only when something is listening. At the top, he understood why people wrote proverbs about stairs. The city rolled out under them like a relocation of weather. The building of doors leaning into its role as landmark, the river that did not appear on every map, the market that changed streets depending on what time it was being asked about. The sky did its nearness trick again. Leo tried not to say it out loud that he wanted to touch it. A person sat at a table the size of a patient secret and as shallow as a rendering. She had ink under her fingernails and the unfussed dignity of someone who had achieved not being surprised, without having had to give up wonder to do it. A dozen cups of not water like the one on the landing arranged themselves at her elbow with the impeccable neatness of objects that live in very small spaces. "Welcome," she said. "Put your name on the stair." "I was told not to." "Not your full name," she said with the small, tired smile of a person who has been rescuing students from grammar since grammar was a new toy. "Your climb name. The one you've been thinking the whole time you've been asking what comes next." Leo had not been thinking his name. He had been thinking questions and Lemon and Mr. Ardan's hand not letting go. He'd been thinking of the word belong in the way you think of a piece you lost from a kit you had refused to admit was incomplete. Beneath those he'd been thinking north. The bracelet ring warned. The stairs bowls hummed, barely audible. Leo took the stub of pencil offered and wrote in the shallow bowl on the top step, north. The ink did not bleed. It settled into the stone like a seed choosing to take that risk again. "That will hold while you're here," the table woman said. "If anyone asks for your other names, deflect. If pressed, invent fearlessly." "What do I get for climbing?" Leo asked. "Besides lemon breath and charming knees." "One thing," she said. "The stair gives everyone one thing. Knowledge, most days. Sometimes weight. Occasionally a joke so good it keeps you from dying." She cupped her hand and lifted not water from a cup without disturbing its surface. For a second Leo saw it. A flat skin of something both wet and light, held in tension like a promise. She tossed it lightly toward Leo. It struck his chest and dissolved into a feeling, and the feeling had a shape, and the shape said, the cabinet wasn't new. It was always there. You learned to see it because someone gave you the habit of noticing. The thought arrived not as a fact but as relief. Leo exhaled. He had no idea he'd been holding his breath around that question. How many times had he walked past something he didn't have a name for and dismissed it as someone else's? He could not decide whether this answer made him feel clever or foolish. He settled for corrected. "Thank you," he said. The woman nodded as if he'd returned a book on time. Cael leaned on the rail, studying the city as if it were a friend having a difficult day. The reclaimer stood at a respectful distance and did not interrupt this benign blasphemy against his schedule. "You want to ask about your teacher," Cael said, not unkindly. Leo nodded. "Ardan kept a cabinet like that in a room like yours long before you were bored in schools," Cael said. "He brought people through in emergencies and on purpose and by accident. He earned friends and enemies and one persistent thesis that keeps turning out to be wrong. He promised us, that is, promised the archivist, that he would stop bringing children after something did not go politely." "What happened?" Leo asked. "A crosser, your age. Maybe a year older. She gave too much of her name to a rule that didn't deserve it." She was not lost. Cael's face rearranged into a seriousness it wore infrequently and well. She was filed. The keepers kept her like a word they respected but refused to use. Ardan tried to unfile her. The index does not unfile easily. "The index?" Leo breathed. "The place the reclaimer lives when he is not performing audits outside his home," Cael said with a little flourish in the keeper's direction, which the reclaimer received without blinking. "A library for events that prefer to be decisions. We got her out, mostly. There are rooms in the Interleaf that remain another person's responsibility to enter. Ardan paid for that door with the thing he believed counted most. He promised not to knock again. And I broke his promise," Leo said. tasting guilt that did not feel useless. The hinge broke it, Cael said. Ardan's promises don't bind machines that old or cities this contrary. Promises bind the promiser. The reclaimer came the last 3 steps, careful dignity slipping to a kind of gentleness he hid for policy reasons. You cannot live a life too tidy for the Interleaf, he said. She finds work for your exceptions. The student Cael remembers is fine now. She works in a weather office 2 hills over and throws salt only when friends are watching. Ardan made a foolish promise. You are not required to uphold it. Leo filed the information in the place his worry lived and felt his worry make room. He took a breath and gave the city a chance to agree with it. It did. The sky leaned closer, but in a way that felt like a cat coming to stand on your book. Not a storm deciding you or a conversation worth ending. Next, Cael said, clapping expectancy out of his hands. The cuff is tuned but untrained. Its opening seams where it pleases. If the wrong door gets ideas about your wrists, we'll spend the afternoon negotiating with furniture. We need a counterweight. I can't. I'm not supposed to give my full name, Leo said. He told me. Mr. Ardan, you won't, Cael said. But names do work, and the work needs doing. We'll borrow a letter instead. From where? Leo asked. The answer was a building away. Harrowmark rearranges her markets. Today it put the market of borrowed things 3 streets from the stair, in the wedge of shadow thrown by a clock tower that did not insist on correct time. Cael led Leo to a narrow stall lined with drawers. The drawers had labels and the labels were all a little descriptive and a little vindictive. Girlish laughter kept in a pocket too long. Middle parts of secrets. Syllables that did not finish their drinks. The keeper of the stall wore gloves despite the heat and the fatigue of someone who could locate any sound by touch. You again, she said to Cael. If you use my desk as a staging ground for municipal heresy one more time, I will invoice you. Cael made the shape of apology. We need a middle letter, they said. For a boy with an incooperative bracelet. Something that could stand in for a name that should not be written. The woman twitched her fingers like a piano in a small apartment. Drawers slid out by 3 inches like a chorus line leaning to see the lead. She selected one labeled vowels that dressed like consonants and set it on the counter with care. Inside lay small cards on which had been drawn nothing at all, and yet each card bulged faintly, as if holding breath. She held her gloved hand over the tray and frowned with concentration in a key that made Leo's teeth ache pleasantly. Then she nodded and plucked a card as if it had volunteered. This is a letter from the middle of a river's name, she said. It will ballast you. Return it when you no longer wish to be held upright against yourself. How much? Cael asked. A story, the woman said. Short, true, told as if I matter. Cael's grin softened. They told the story of the time they returned a grandfather's pocket watch to a woman who had hated the grandfather, and how she had cried so suddenly that the dog under the table woke comedic and ended by laughing, and how the only person who did not laugh was Cael because they were trying not to cry on the watch. It took 30 seconds. It contained exactly enough salt. The woman placed the card against the bracelet. The outer ring stopped trying to decide whether to be helpful or dramatic and settled into a working purr. Leo felt the change in his bones. It didn't tame the cuff. It explained it to him in a vocabulary he could carry. That will hold until you eat salt foolishly, the woman murmured. So don't. He thanked her, meant it, and turned to find the world considering him differently. The way a store considers you when you finally remember that you can afford to be in it. The way a conversation considers you when you decide to answer in the right language. A color moved at the edge of the market's crowd. Gray so exact only the reclaimer would wear it, and a feeling moved with it. Sensible, inevitable, uninsulted. He was not pursuing, he was accompanying. It would have been rude to be frightened of someone so courteous. "What else do we need?" Leo asked as they threaded the stalls. He did not ask who else because the city had begun to supply that answer without help. "A place to tune," Cael said. "And a place to hide while we failed the first time." "Hide from whom?" Leo asked. "From the ampersands," Cael said. "The what?" They didn't answer. They pointed. At the far end of the market, where street made up its mind to be alley and alley remembered it had always wanted to be a lane. A pack of things that were not animals nor words moved with a bureaucratic grace. You could call them punctuation, if punctuation hired itself out as debt collectors. Ampersands, and, sleek and black, jointed at exactly the right degree to loop and loop again. They threaded the crowd without bumping anyone, because that's how good rules behave. They pass through you lightly as they constrict. "Contracts," Cael said under their breath. "Mr. Ardan's day job's after us." "They can't be after me yet," Leo said. "I haven't promised anything." "Oh, you made promises the second you stepped through a seam," Cael said. "Your feet promise ground to ground. Your eyes promise light to light. Your lungs, don't get me started on lungs. Besides, the ampersands are not about your promises. They're about his." A chin jerk toward the reclaimer, who tilted his head in the universal sign for yes, and the ampersands turned their not faces toward Leo's bracelet. The outer ring ticked once with the crispness of a person sharpening their own hearing. "We should go," the reclaimer said, as if suggesting an early adjournment at a meeting where nothing worse than minutes would happen. "Agreed," Cael said. "North, this way." They cut down a lane that refused to admit it had a second end. Stalls thinned. Laundry reasserted itself. A child with a kite shaped like an ellipsis waved solemnly as if releasing permission. The ampersands followed with the inevitability of etiquette. "Why are they called that?" Leo asked. "Because running is improved by thinking and thinking by naming." "Because they add themselves to any sentence that thinks it's finished," Cael said. "Because they are a habit in the shape of an animal. Because when you are careful you say, and, more than you say, but." And, they added, with the slant grin Leo was learning meant a bad decision in a great mood, because they hate stairs. They hit a stair. Not the Reading Stair. The city does not repeat herself so lazily, but a fire escape that had ideas above its station. It rose in a zigzag while ivy argued with its bolts. Cael went up 3 steps at a time, Leo in the middle, the reclaimer walking as if the steps had been positioned to answer his orthopedist's prayer. The ampersands evaluated, jellied their loops, and flowed upward as if gravity and diction had kissed and missed in this alley. So much for hating stairs. Cael reached the landing and did a thing to the door that was not a knock. It involved the back of their hand and a rhythm Leo recognized. 7-3 sweep, he said, and couldn't place why the numbers felt like mercy. Old metronome, Cael said. Old friends. The door unlatched with a sigh. On the other side stretched a narrow hall lined with instruments that were either musical or surgical or both. Tuning forks the size of spires, drumheads with maps inked on their skins, bell mouths that remembered the wharf. The air smelled like metal listening. The sign on the wall had been painted in a hand with no time for flourish, Orchestry. "Welcome back," said a voice from behind a set of chimes designed by a patient god. Its owner emerged. A tall person whose hair refused to withstand a bow and who wore a vest stitched from time signatures. Their ears held 2 small brass spoons as earrings, the symbol of someone polite enough to stir tea even when having a day. Rowan, Cael said, relieved in every syllable. We need a room that doesn't leak. Doesn't leak what? Rowan asked, which was kind. Names and rules and air and sense, Cael said. The usual. Rowan slid their eyes over Leo and nodded once. You found another note that fits the city, they said. Good. The melody was thin this season. They led them through a maze of baffles and curtains into a chamber whose floor had been quilted from wood and rubber and something that smelled faintly of citrus. Rowan touched the wall. It hummed in thirds, then settled into the background the way a fridge becomes honesty in a kitchen. The cuffs learned to throw seams, then, Rowan said, circling Leo with open curiosity. They always get energetic around new hands. You'll want to give it something steadier to do than show off at markets. They pointed to a table on which lay an apparatus that looked like a stethoscope designed by a cartographer. Let me listen. Leo sat. Rowan placed the apparatus over the bracelet, and an ink needle on a strip of paper began to write in little insistences and resigned stretches. It's tuned to whichever world keeps better count, Rowan said after a moment. Which today is here. Congratulations and condolences. We can dampen the resonance that's making the ampersands anxious, but the city will still hear you when you sneeze. How do we do it? Leo asked. Salt, Rowan said. Then, before he could panic, not the eating kind. The standing kind. Rowan fetched a shallow bowl, stone, carved with tiny dimples that made the old itch return in Leo's palm, and set it under his hand. They poured in a measure of salt and a thimble of water. The grains didn't dissolve, they arranged themselves like counsel. Rowan scattered 3 seeds, small and black as commas, across the surface. Repeat after me, Rowan said. I am not a door. I am a person wearing a door. Leo repeated it. The bracelet's outer ring ticked backward once, then forward twice, like a machine agreeing to public transport. Again, Rowan said. Louder. Leo said it louder. The salt shivered, then lay still. The ampersands arrived at the threshold like the end of a sentence. Rowan didn't turn. Your runes leak, one of them said without moving its knot mouth. Its voice was pleasant, because oppression often is when it gets customer service right. We can hear the unfiled. And? Rowan inquired, and Leo realized the orchestry had not only acoustics. It had a tone. And, the ampersand said, faltering fractionally under the weight of having been challenged by a conjunction, and we are obliged to ask if you intend to make a mess. Define mess, Rowan said, gentle as a hand closing a door in a face they have not decided to forgive. The reclaimer stepped up beside the ampersands, a boundary disguised as an escort. Not now, he said to them, his voice the closest to warmth Leo had heard from it. He needs tuning. You know what happens when you interrupt a tuning. The ampersands, to their credit, did. They recoiled a half-inch, the reflex of men who have been shocked by microphones in public. Then, after a pause that carried an entire paragraph and a reluctant footnote, they inclined the top loop of their bodies in a bow that was either respect or awaiting further data, and withdrew without turning, which was an act of professional pride. They could have taken me, Leo said when the air remembered it was for breathing. They don't take, the reclaimer said. They bind. I would rather you learn to choose than be chosen for. Thank you, Leo said. Do not thank me for doing my job, the reclaimer said, but accepted the gratitude the way a ledger accepts a number it didn't expect. Rowan tapped the needle's trailing paper strip and frowned. You need ballast more than you need volume. Whoever keyed you didn't finish the lesson. No offense. Taken on his behalf, Leo said. He felt disloyal and decided to sit with it politely until it learned to knock. "We can borrow weight," Rowan said. "A letter was good. A place would be better. The city will hold you if you hold a piece of her correctly." The challenge, they added, with the practiced patience of someone entangling thread under stage lighting, is that the easiest weight to borrow is the shadow. And you are not to hand your shadow to anyone. "No," Cael said. "We'll go to the umbrella vault." "The what?" Leo and the reclaimer asked, in perfect unison. Cael looked too pleased by it to apologize. "Old shelter under the Broadwalk," Cael said. "People have been leaving their umbrellas there for so long that it remembers weather. If we fasten your cuff to a handle that has held 100 storms, you might stop being the only weather in the market." Rowan considered, then nodded. "Take the west stairs. Tell the vault you are here for rest, not refuge. And bring the letter back in 3 days," the stallkeeper said from no logical corner of the room, which was a neat trick. "Or I'd charge interest." They set out before the ampersands had time to compose a memo. The west stairs were painted the blue of public signage and had discovered how to survive chipped. The Broadwalk arced along the river's bend beneath a roof the color of forgetting. People left their umbrellas propped against the pillars like arguments they intended to return to but had decided to be kinder to next time. In one bay, where a bench had been retired to memorial and a plaque read to the rain that arrived when we could afford to stand in it, a door leaned against brick. It had no frame. Its handle wore a ribbon of salt stiffened black. "The vault," Cael said. They knocked a rhythm that made Leo think of tin roofs and long novels. The door opened a certain distance. The air inside smelled like wet wool and relief. "We're here for rest," Cael said. "Not refuge." "Good," said the vault, in a voice like a wicker hamper emptying itself. "Refuge I can do all day. Rest is the specialized menu." It was not exactly a room. It was a collection of corrugations and benches and hooks and places where rain remembered having been taken seriously. Umbrellas leaned in careful heaps. Parasols sulked under coats. Shepherd's crooks rested along the back wall in a posture that implied a day off. The sound of rain, which was not happening outside, happened in here as an agreement. Leo held up his wrist. "I need to stop being a draft," he said. "For a while." "Wise," said the vault. "I like the old rules but I do not enjoy pneumonia." It produced, not from a cupboard, from itself, a handle worn by hands, wrapped at one end in faded ribbon the color of a summer school uniform. Cael tied the ribbon to the bracelet with a knot that apologized to the leather. The cuff's ring ticked once, twice, settling into a pace Leo recognized from train stations, not fast, not slow, only certain. "Better," the vault said, satisfied. "Bring it back when you have learned to be weather for someone else. Don't leave it in a storm you can avoid." "We won't," Cael said. They were turning toward the knot door when a voice, waking itself reluctantly, spoke from the darkest corner. "He can't go back yet," it said. It was somebody's declaration made into a rule. A figure stepped forward, and Leo recognized the pattern before the face. Pale blue, embroidered moons, the tie that never matched the weather. Except it wasn't a tie now. It was a scarf, wrapped twice around a throat that wasn't Mr. Ardan's and was. "Hello, Leo," she said, and the room rearranged itself around the sound of his name made that way. "Don't flinch. I'm not his secret wife or his guilty conscience. I may promise he made so thoroughly it learned to wear shoes." Cael made a noise you make when a forecast goes from cloudy to context. "Vow," they said. "You left the index?" "The index let me go," Vow said. "On condition I tell only 2 lies today and make them good ones. I have used none so far." Leo stared. She had Mr. Ardan's patience around the eyes and his certainty around the mouth, and she stood the way he did when he had decided to be kind on purpose. He thought of the story of the student who had been filed and then unfiled, of the cost of promises that bind the promiser. He made you, Leo said. He made me by speaking me, Vow said. He made me by needing me. He made me by believing he could keep a child out of a city that changes according to how much you want it. Which was a foolish thing to believe, and not wrong enough to be unkind. I'm here because the ring on your arm has been biting the pockets of Harrowmark, and I would like you to stop it before the keepers decide to tidy you away. Also because you need a better map than the one your panic is drawing. What do I do? Leo asked, the question coming out small and honest. Finish the tuning, Vow said. Learn the 3 foods. Choose your middle. Return the letter. Avoid salt unless you need to bind, and then bind only to someone who has shown you their smallest fear without making you carry it. When the reclaimer asks for receipts, show him the ribbon on your wrist. And when you hear the ampersands bah ha ha in the next market, go left. One at a time, Cael begged, cheerful despite the urgency. 3 foods? The Interleaf eats, Vow said. So do you. First food, stories, which you must tell and be told, and which you must never sell for more than they can survive. Second food, attention, pay it like rent and salary. Third food, salt, sit with it in a bowl. Do not put it in your mouth until you know what you are trying to keep. The reclaimer had been silent, which for him took effort. And his teacher? He asked. Still holding his side of me, Vow said. Regretting, counting. He will come through when he thinks he can hide it, which is to say, badly. He thinks he is protecting the school. He is, accidentally, protecting you. He doesn't know it yet. Do not be angry first. Be clever first. You can be angry later. Leo felt something unhook under his ribs. A line that had been attached to an idea of responsibility he had taken as natural and now suspected was inherited nonsense. How do I finish the tuning? He asked. You go to a place that listens, Vow said. And you ask it to keep time with you instead of against you. The Orchestry, Cael said. The Orchestry, Vow agreed. Rowan will make you sing into the wall until the wall likes you. The wall is an elitist but not unpersuadable. Then you will go to the index and tell them a story on purpose. The index, the reclaimer repeated, reserved and resigned. With me, with you, Vow said. Because I would like to see you be correct about a person, for once, without losing the person to their file. The vault's walls made the sound of one umbrella opening for another. Oh, good, it said. An outing. Mind you bring my ribbon back. The weather does not like to lose its own. They went. Back outside, Harrowmark had reheated to late afternoon. The ampersands were nowhere visible, which did not mean they had lost interest. It meant they had sent an email to Fate and were waiting back channel. Cael set a fast, not running pace. The reclaimer walked like a man who had decided that if he must bend a rule today, he would do so in such a way that the rule could be proud of him tomorrow. Vow did not glide. She moved like a promise you remember at inconvenient times. They were 2 streets from the Orchestry when the first seam opened. It started as a hum in Leo's wrist like a fly refusing to be dignified and became, very quickly, a fold in the air ahead of them. People stepped around it. A pigeon hopped through it and came out with a different mood. The seam meant no harm. It meant later. It meant here as and elsewhere adjacent. Leo reached without thinking. He was the kind of idiot who touched stoves. And Vow slapped his hand with the precision of a ruler on a school desk. Not yours, she said. That seam is for a conversation you are not yet having. Walk. They walked. The scene followed for a half-second like a puppy you can't afford. The ribbon around the bracelet tugged and the scene reconsidered, then chose a window 2 stories up and slipped there into a plant that had been needing a south wind. Rowan met them in the orchestry with the look of someone who had put the kettle on and been rewarded with events. Fast learner? They asked of Leo. Competent at not dying, Cael said. Which is an underrated talent. Rowan pressed Leo's hand back over the bowl of salt and seeds. Say the thing again, they said. I am not a door, Leo said. I am a person wearing a door. Mean it this time, Rowan said. Leo did. He did not say it louder. He said it true. The wall hummed in fifths, then softened, then found a hum that matched the bracelet's subdued purr. Val nodded once, knit marklessly in approval. The reclaimer exhaled. Cael sat on an overturned drum and rolled a coin over their knuckles with the unconscious grace of someone who'd been taught by a magician who didn't think magic was the point. Good, Rowan said. Now go make a deal with a building that hates being disagreed with. The index, the reclaimer said again, and the word in his mouth was a door he had learned to open without knocking. It lived in a low building that would have looked like a library anywhere else. Here it looked like a polite argument with time. Steps wore down in a way that made feet feel responsible. The plaque by the door contained the idea of a dedication and the specific sentence. For those who think there should be a record and those who think there should not. Take off your ribbon when we get to the desk, Val said, quiet but exact. Let them see you bend. That will invite filing, the reclaimer said. It will invite respect, Val said. Which is how you get a room to listen long enough to care. Inside, the air was the temperature of a well-kept promise. Shelves did not simply hold books. They hosted decisions, each bound in the material that suited it best. Leather for compromises, linen for refusals. A brittle thin paper that made Leo think of dried flowers for leavings. The polite word the index had invented for departures that became a kind of staying. At the desk stood a person you'd trust with a will. She had the kind of face you grow into and then never out of. Her hands were stained with something that had once been blacker than midnight and had elected to be friendlier over time. Reclaimer, she said, and her voice made colleagues sound like a compliment. Cael, you brought a door. A person wearing one, Rowan corrected, though Rowan was not there. The orchestry's tone traveled with them anyhow. It occurred to Leo that Harrowmark did not merely have neighborhoods. It had carried rooms, and the rooms carried their own gravity. And he was learning to be a planet that did not throw chairs across the kitchen when the refrigerator hummed. I'd like to tell a story, Leo said, and the desk minder's eyes came to him like a window learning how to be a door. Name? She asked. North, Leo said. Today. Subject? She asked. How I got here, Leo said, and then, because truth made itself cheap when oversimplified, and what I thought I'd find, and what I actually did. She set out a folio. Ink curled its spine like a listening cat. You may begin. He told them about the cabinet. He told them about Greaves's tie-sharp voice and Mr. Ardan's hand and Cael's coat and the dog on the bench and the lemon air that tasted like permission. He did not mention his father because his father had nothing to do with the hinge and everything to do with why he had noticed it. He did not mention terror because terror would show up in the punctuation anyway, and why be redundant? He finished, and the desk minder cut the story somewhere halfway through its own desire to continue. We will keep the part about the rules, she said. We will lend out the part about the stair. We will not stock the part about which door and room and time unless you bring us receipts. We will accept the tie detail, because accuracy makes story behave. Val reached over and removed the ribbon from Leo's wrist with a motion that made the orchestra hum in his head. She laid it on the folio. The desk minder nodded and placed the ribbon in a small dish that smelled like rain. "We'll hold that for you," she said. "When you collect it, you will be accountable. Do not transfer the account to a friend without telling them what interest looks like." The reclaimer's relief looked, perversely, like worry. He always looked that way when the index behaved itself. He was happiest when erosion and order cooperated. The ampersands arrived for the second time that day. They came through the door, which was rude. Most things knock. They slithered across the floorboards, which creaked only to announce their own restraint. The lead ampersand lowered its inner loop, which meant we would like to speak. The desk minder, unflustered, lowered her pen by an equal increment, which meant you may, but if you become performance art I will staple you. And, the ampersand said in their almost pleasant voice, and, we have an outstanding conjunction. It gestured at Leo's bracelet, and a boy who belongs to a bell that has not rung yet, and an index with a recipe for mischief, and a reclaimer who has not yet reclaimed. "Your point?" the desk minder inquired. Her voice remained the temperature of tea you let cool so as not to burn your patience. "We would like to bind a small part of this," the ampersand said, "and in exchange we agreed to pursue less of the rest, and we brought salt." It produced a packet of salt one might find in a diner. It was impossible to know where it had stored it. Val's hand touched Leo's sleeve. "No," she said. Her voice held one of the day's lies. "It wasn't tea, no, it was not now." She moved like rain choosing where to fall. "I can speak," Leo said, "because if he didn't, he would be spoken for, and he had already done that once today and disliked its aftertaste." He looked at the salt. He looked at the ribbon. He looked at the reclaimer, who did not nod and did not shake his head and thereby did him the courtesy of refusing to be the kind of adult who decides and then fails to accept the consequences. "I won't eat it," he said, steady. "But I'll stand the bowl again. And I'll make my own end." He set his hand on the desk. The desk minder slid the salt bowl up as if they had rehearsed it. He scattered the 3 comma seeds himself, clumsy but eager. He spoke into the not water. "And I will return the ribbon. And I will return the letter. And I will not hand my shadow to anyone who offers to carry it across a threshold I cannot yet name." The ampersand stilled. The reclaimer exhaled with something like pride and something like relief. Val's shoulders came down the inch she had been holding them up to be taller than her fear. Cael flicked the coin and caught it like a sentence you catch on your tongue for later. "Fine," the ampersand said. It sounded offended in a professional way. "And we will file a notice of hearty reluctance, and we will return when the bell rings." They turned to leave, then turned back, unwilling to forego the last word. "And you smell of lemon. And it is not unbecoming." They went. The desk minder's pen resumed its small journey along an incline. "You have maybe a day," she said, glancing at the clock that did not insist on correctness but tried to be kind. "And then your teacher will do something brave and foolish. I know the pattern. We have it on file." "What should I do?" Leo asked. "Be ready to be brave and clever," Val said. "If you can't be both, be kind, but try." "Where will he come through?" Cael asked, already making shapes of roots with their hands. "The same cabinet?" "No," Val said. "He will use nostalgia. He will pick a door that remembers the day he thought he could put the Interleaf in a drawer and label it, later. He will come through the old tram, at the cut, where the tracks keep going though no one believes in them." "The cut," the reclaimer said, whisper thin. "Busy." "Good," said Cael, cheerfully. "We like witnesses." Leo lifted his wrist. The bracelet's ring behaved as if it had been acknowledged. The ribbon sat in its dish, a small wether waiting to be claimed. The letter, the middle from the river's name, held him upright and square against the city's wind. Tomorrow, vows said, we go to the cut. Tonight you sleep. If the ceiling leaks, put out a bowl. Learn the sound. It will be useful. Where do I sleep? Leo asked, suddenly, stupidly shy. Cael pointed at their own chest, at the coat made of arguments and kilometers. For now, where I live, they said. Where lost things come to get in from the weather and leave again. I have a spare bed that believes it is a couch. It is wrong, but on good nights it lets you be wrong with it. They walked out of the index, past shelves that smelled like decision and doubt, into a city that had learned his name for today and would forgive him if he wore a different one tomorrow. The sky had gone a violet that would admit to blue if you insisted. The river's surface held the last light like a note. Across the square, a seam opened. It was small, polite, and aimed at a cat. The cat declined. The seam, chagrined, made itself into a length of wind and went home to think about what it had done. Good, Val said to no one. Everyone's learning. They ate soup that used to be weather and bread that remembered being a field. Leo told Cael about Mr. Ardan's time moods and about Greaves's sensible shoes and about his own refusal, thus far, to learn the word extracurricular because it had the wrong number of syllables for something you were supposed to love. Cael told Leo how to argue with a door without being unkind. The reclaimer sat by the window and watched shadows behave. Val slept sitting up and did not snore. Leo dreamed of the stair. In the dream he wrote the word north again, and the bowl wrote back, the way a lake writes back to a stone. The reply wasn't a word. It was a compass pointing at tomorrow. When he woke, the sound of wheels on old tracks had already begun underneath the city, the way thunder begins before anyone agrees to call it weather. Leo woke to wheels remembering themselves. It was not a sound the street outside Cael's rooms normally made. The usual city noises, the argument of kettles, the conspiracy of pigeons, the size of doors waking up for their shifts, stepped out of the way as a low iron murmur threaded beneath the floorboards. In his dream he had been writing north again into a bowl and the bowl had pushed the pencil back, polite and insistent, yes, and now the pencil was a tram bell, and the bell was a clock, and the clock said now. Cael was already up, shrugging themselves into the coat of pockets and maps. Val sat at the window, eyes closed, as if listening with her skin. The reclaimer held a cup of tea like a temporary policy. On the table, a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside, when Cael slid it with a thumbnail, lay a brass tuning fork long enough to be a sword disguised as a conversation. From Rowan, Cael said, tone bright with relief. A portable hum, for when walls are too far away to like us. Leo touched the fork with a fingertip. It tingled like good news. The ribbon from the umbrella vault lay beside it, looped once through the cuff's leather. The bracelet's outer ring purred instead of prowled. Breakfast, Cael said, pushing a plate toward him. What is it? Leo asked, because new cities deserved careful curiosity. Stew of manners and lentils, Cael said. Eat the manners first. They went. Harrowmark had tilted very slightly as if the city, too, were standing to listen. People were moving toward the old freight trench called the cut, the way people go to a shoreline when someone says whale. The reclaimer walked 2 steps behind with a kindness that refused to be a shadow. Val walked ahead with the unhurried urgency of a person who has already left once and chosen to come back. The cut lived like a scar through 3 neighborhoods and an argument. Once, long ago, trains had hauled stone and words along it. Now, weeds held the ballast as if it were warming their feet. The tracks went on where maps ended, sliding into a tunnel that was a decision. Nothing more here to people whose eyes preferred signs. 14 more options to anyone tuned to old steel. It was busy. Fruit sellers had set up along the parapets on instinct, because people perform commerce at thresholds even when civilization is politely falling apart. Children perched on shoulders. An elderly man held a sign that read simply again with the satisfied neutrality of a prophet who had called it yesterday and the day before. Where? Leo asked, hand on the rail, cuff warm. There, Vow said, nodding toward the mouth of the tunnel. Light shifted. The darkness at the far end shook itself like a horse coming out of water. A rectangular glow gathered and swam forward. The tram was not modern and not antique. It was the shape of usefulness, the doors narrow and a little stubborn, paint the municipal green of forgiveness. A number plate above the windshield flickered through destinations, depot, docks, later, home, before settling on school. Of course it did. The tram bell rang once. It had a tone Leo's spine recognized from bored afternoons waiting for the last bell in rooms that smelled of solvent and dust. The tram glided into the cut as if riding memory rails the city had laid for nostalgia on purpose. The crowd breathed. Vow's mouth tilted, an expression that contained love and long practice at not letting love make her foolish. The doors folded. A man stepped down with a carefulness that looked like agreeableness unless you had seen it before. Navy blazer threaded shiny at the elbows, hair engaging in a polite dispute with gray. Tie wrong for the weather, pale blue, small silver moons. Mr. Ardan looked older and exactly the same. He took one step onto Harrowmark and the city adjusted her belt. Ah, the reclaimer said softly. Not a warning, a welcome with caveats. The ampersands arrived as two polite columns bracketing the platform. Their loops gleamed. Their not faces were the picture of administrative efficiency. The crowd parted for them with that wary loathing reserved for necessary forms. Ardan, said one, voice almost kind. And, said Mr. Ardan, inclining his head like the top line of a fraction. His eyes moved once across the gathered faces, not searching, just receiving. They found Leo and did not flinch. He broke into a smile that held apology like a folded note in a pocket. North, he said, as if trying out a new equation on the chalkboard. Don't, Vow said, no heat, only accuracy. Leo. Mr. Ardan's smile tightened and became a wince he did not permit to travel all the way to his eyes. He lifted his hands, palms empty. I came, he said to the reclaimer, to file my promises properly. And to pick up what I should never have put down. Promises do better when they are carried, the reclaimer said. Not checked. Agreed, Ardan murmured, and then, in the tone he had only ever used in rooms where learning had to survive boredom, Leo. Are you hurt? Are you angry? Do you want to go home? Yes, Leo said, because there had been no instruction against telling 3 truths at once. Good, Ardan said, relief audible. All 3 answers are evidence you are still yourself. The cuff warmed at Leo's wrist. Under the platform, a seam rolled over in its sleep. The ampersand's loops turned, a neat shared glance. And we would like the tie, one said. And the declaration you made last spring. And the words you used to keep the child from the cabinet. And we will label them sincerely. Vow stepped between Ardan and the ampersands with the unshowy grace of a person who has stood in 1,000 doorways between weather and debris. No, she said, you have me already, which is more than any filing system should have to eat. And, said the lead ampersand, and you are a vow without a promiser, which is improper. Improper, Val repeated, smiling as if the word had decided at last to practice joy. We've met. He's over there in a blazer. Ardan's hands trembled, exactly once, at exactly the joints that should have trembled. I broke something for you, he said to Val. I made you so big you could walk, and then I tried to be something else. I'm sorry. You made me and then fed me, Val said, gentler than forgiveness. Until I learned to feed myself. That is not breaking, that is raising. You were wrong about the part where you could keep the world out with a promise you made to yourself in the dark. But you were correct about not letting a child go alone. Thank you for being incorrect politely. The ampersands rippled like punctuation discovering a joke. The reclaimer took one step, then stopped, then took another, a man arguing his own policies down to their reasonable underlayers. We will hear story, he said to Ardan. Not apology, not recounting, story. Then we will consider whether filing would feed or starve this city. Story, Ardan said. He looked at Leo, not over him. He took a breath. Val's hand twitched as if she wanted to pass him a bowl and then remembered her hands did not belong to him anymore. Cael, whose coat held entire roads in its lining, reached into a pocket and produced a small stone bowl with tiny dimples carved in it like a constellation. They set it on a crate. They did not add salt. Talk into this, Cael said cheerfully. It gives shy sentences somewhere to hide while they work. Mr. Ardan laughed once, because competence made him feel less like a mistake. He spoke. He talked about a student who had pressed her face to the window whenever fog came in thick, because fog meant the machines might be late and lateness made the world kinder. He talked about a cabinet he had inherited from an uncle who had died without having the grace to tell anyone what to do next. He talked about stepping through seams with careful people and careless ones and the line between those two being nothing like a line. He did not say I am brave and did not say I am sorry, and somehow the spaces those sentences would have occupied filled with locomotion anyway. When he came to the part about the girl who had been filed, about the index and the way a promise can start as love and end as furniture, Leo felt the ampersands loops shift closer. Not hungrily, not lovingly, professionally. Val's mouth curled like paper remembering fire. And then, Ardan said, voice steady as a teacher's hand on a lab burner, I promised I would not bring a child again. Thinking I could be the gasket in a door built before gaskets. Thinking I could be the law. I made a vow because I was tired, not because I was wise. It grew legs and did the walking I could not. I have come to make it small again, or big enough to share. The ampersands held still, their kindest violence hovering. The reclaimer inclined his head. You have learned one thing, he said. We like those. They are collectible. Here is my one thing, Ardan said, and turned to Leo. It was never the cabinet that decided. It was the person within hearing distance of the seam. You have always been the decision. If you go home now, I will not consider you a rescue I failed. If you stay, I will not consider you an argument I lost. Choose so that your choosing can keep you company. A breath moved through the crowd. The elderly man's again sign tilted as if nodding. Under Leo's wrist the cuff's outer ring slowed to his pulse and found it acceptable. The ribbon tugged, not direction, duration. He had 2 days left on the letter. He had his middle from the river's name, ballast against being whisked like paperwork. He had lemon between his lungs. He had a tension and a story and a bowl that would hold salt only when he meant it. Before I choose, Leo said, I want to finish tuning the door I'm wearing. Otherwise my choosing will tip a room it doesn't have to tip. Good, said 3 voices at once. Cael's, Rowan's from nowhere, and, to Leo's surprise, the reclaimers. Do it, vows said. Here. Cael set the tuning fork on the crate beside the bowl. Rowan said hum in thirds if the air bites. Fifths if it brags. Unisons only after someone in authority laughs. Has anyone in authority laughed? Leo asked, dry. Not yet, said the reclaimer, but the corner of his mouth did something that could be filed under preparatory mirth. Leo lifted the fork and struck it lightly against the rail. The fork sang, not loud, not bossy. It found a note under the general noise and made it available. The cut's stone sides thrummed in sympathy. The bowl declared itself ready. The cuff's ring clicked twice, like reins being shortened by a hand that knows horses. He set his palm over the bowl. He did not add salt. I am not a door, he said. I am a person wearing a door. He meant it. The words did not get bigger, they got truer. The seam at the back of the platform, which had been flexing its muscles at passers-by like a teenager trying on swagger, relaxed and draped itself into a shadow where it would do no harm. A second seam, above the tram, considered being dramatic, then failed to blossom. Again, Rowan said, impossible and present. I am not a door, Leo said. I am a person wearing a door. I choose when to open. I choose who to carry. The ampersand's leading loop lowered in something that might have been respect. And, it said, hesitant. And we hear a conjunction we can agree to. Of course you do, Cael said, too pleased to be politic. Consent has an ampersand in it already. Someone laughed. Not anyone with a sash or a badge. A woman selling oranges, with juice on her wrists and competence in her smile. The laugh lifted the scene like a hinge taking grease. The reclaimer's eyes warmed that half-degree he allowed himself on holidays. Now, Val said quietly, choose. Leo looked at Mr. Ardan and tried the feeling of every possible answer on his ribs. Go home now and slam the cabinet with politeness. It fit, barely. Stay and let the city write his name deeper onto your edges. That fit, too, and laughed. He pictured his own school desk, the dent in it that had learned the exact curve of his impatient hand. He pictured the stairs in Harrowmark that fed you small truths if you gave them your breath. He pictured the way Mr. Ardan's voice always left space after a sentence so someone else could put something there. I want both, he said, and felt the crowd lean back, offended or delighted by his greed. Not a tether that means I'm in two places badly. A schedule, a practice, and. The ampersands hummed, as happy as punctuation can be. And, said the lead. And. That is not a choice, the reclaimer said, because it was his job. Then, reneging with grace, it is a plan disguised as a sentence. I accept it provided it has receipts. I'll bring the ribbon back, Leo said. I'll return the letter. I'll file a story with the index each time I cross. Accepted, said the desk minder's voice from no discernible direction, because the index had opinion even outside its perimeter when the plot asked nicely. Mr. Ardan blew out a tight breath that could almost be read as a sob if you had the decency not to say so. Then I need to do my job, he said. With my classroom and your bracelet and the chair that always wobbles. You will not take him today, Val said, not as a power play, as a weather report. You will take him on a day you can mean it. You will practice. You will stop pretending you don't need help. You will let Cael trip you on purpose before your first crossing because humility looks better when it is planned. Her mouth quirked. And you will buy salt only when you are clear why. Ardan bowed once to her. It looked untheatrical and perfectly earned. He turned to go back to the tram and then remembered a thing. He came back 2 steps, took Leo's shoulders, and said, low enough to be private in a city that can keep a secret when it believes you deserve one. You do not owe me not to have a life. I know, Leo said. It shocked him to find that he did. Good, Ardan said, and walked toward the tram. The ampersands rippled to let him pass. The crowd parted the way water does when it agrees to get out of a boat's way before the boat asks. Val watched him with a face that had room for both relief and ache. The reclaimer moved alongside Ardan like a semaphore. Cael leaned into Leo like a friend leaning into a railing to make it a bench. The tram doors folded. Ardan stepped inside. He did not sit. He held the pole because that is how teachers ride on field trips. The bell rang once and the tram began to roll backward toward the tunnel, toward the kind of return that did not feel like erasure. Halfway to the dark, the air in front of the car pinched. Asim, impatient with all this civility, opened where it had no right to open. In the tram's mouth, the worst possible distance from the platform. It was not large. It did not need to be. It flickered like a camera shutter, and the front wheels of the tram moved through before anyone agreed to it. The car juddered and froze. The coupling shrieked. People shouted helpful nouns. The ampersands startled like ink splattering. The reclaimer made a sound that was not bureaucratic at all. It was not a catastrophe yet. It was the kind of beginning of catastrophe that asks, "What would you like to do with me?" "Salt," Val said calmly. Leo already had the bowl in his hands. He had not added salt because he had been too proud of not adding salt. Pride is simply timing wearing a hat. Cael's fingers were suddenly beside his, scattering 3 comma seeds with an unshowy competence that would always make Leo ache with gratitude. The reclaimer, controlled chaos, produced a neat paper packet, the diner kind, by God, and tore it with his teeth. He poured. "Speak," Rowan said, their voice traveling like a fresh breeze through a staircase. Leo put his palm over the bowl. The cuff's ring tightened, then gave. The tuning fork lay on the crate ready to be struck again. "I am not a door," Leo said. "I am a person wearing a door." He pointed, not with a finger, with the sentence. "And this seam belongs to a tram that believes in returning. And it can try again somewhere safer. And we can all be proud of ourselves in the report." The bowl sang. The salt arranged itself into a shape that looked suspiciously like tracks going around a small problem. The seam hiccuped. You could feel it blush. It closed not with a bang but with the guilty zeal of a drawer that had been left open by a child who intends to be believed when they say they didn't. The tram slid back onto the proper geometry. The bell rang twice without being told. Someone laughed. For real this time, not politely. It came out of Mr. Ardan, shockingly, like a cough that had chosen joy. The reclaimer's mouth made a shape he would deny if quoted. The ampersand's loops, mortified, wrote the word "and" on the air as if to apologize formally. The tram rolled into the tunnel. The cut exhaled. People dispersed, not in panic, in that relieved scatter that happens when the world chooses to continue and we get to keep our errands. "Good," Val said to Leo, and now it was praise without pedagogy. "You used salt without letting it use you. You made an N. We can work with ants." "Now what?" Leo asked, the question already yawning open to swallow the next hour. "Now," Cael said, "we teach you how to open seams on purpose in a classroom without making the principal think the building is sighing at her. Now we buy oranges because you did an admirable thing without breakfast seconds. Now we go return a letter on time because interest is a story we do not wish to owe. Now we rest because tomorrow is part 4. "Part what?" Leo said, delighted and alarmed to discover the city had numbered his days. "Part 4 of a day that started on a Tuesday," Cael said, eyes bright. "Part 4 of a promise that learned to walk. Part 4 of a boy who thought he had been chosen and is slowly suspecting he has also been tutored. Val lifted the ribbon out of the dish the index had sent along with its disembodied approval. She tied it back around Leo's wrist herself, cool fingers deft. 2 days, she said. Then return it. Then choose again. I choose and, Leo said, because he was not done being greedy on purpose. The reclaimer made a note in a small, reasonable ledger. And recorded, he said dryly. And witnesses present, and cake recommended. Cake? Leo said hopefully. Salt's friend, Cael said. Third food's dessert. Come on. They walked up out of the cut into a Harrowmark that had decided to be golden for an hour. The tracks kept going. The sky learned the color of a field forgiven its mistakes. Somewhere behind them, a seam tried very hard not to open where it wasn't invited and succeeded. Somewhere ahead, a principal in sensible shoes said the words structural engineer into a phone and then added, against her will, and perhaps a poet. Leo's cuff purred. He counted 7 with his bones and 3 with his breath and let the sweep carry him. He had a bowl. He had a fork. He had a teacher who had remembered how to be brave without mistaking it for being alone. He had a city that liked him better when he did not pretend he wasn't heavy. He had Part 4 waiting, and for once the waiting didn't feel like an accident. The letter wanted to be returned before the city decided to charge interest in weather. Leo felt it tug in his sternum as soon as he woke, an internal nudge that read like deadline even in Harrowmark's handwriting. Cael boiled water, declared tea to be the 4th food when the world was thinking too fast, and walked him back to the market of borrowed things while Val and the reclaimer arranged complicated politeness with the index. The stall-keeper with the gloved hands was still there, still listening with her fingertips. Ah, she said, when Leo held out the invisible weight he'd been carrying, the borrowed middle letter from a river's name. Right on time, and not a heartbeat late. I liked how it held me up, Leo admitted. That's what middles do when you stop trying to step on them like stones, she said, and slipped the letter back into its drawer as if returning a teenager to their room. You may come back to it, if you promise to leave it better rested. Leo promised. The drawer hummed approval. Harrowmark, which respected returns almost as much as it adored good theft, felt warmer by half a degree. Back at Cael's, Rowan had left a note that smelled faintly of solder and lemon. Tuning fork charged. Wall-tone recorded. Remember. Hum thirds before fifths. Unisons only if someone in charge has already laughed. P.S. Don't let policy eat your bowl. Underneath, an ink line, 7 dots, arrest, 3 dots, a long sweep, printed music for a wall. They set out with pockets full of small noises. Val walked like a promise that had learned to be portable. The reclaimer kept 2 steps behind, ledger under one arm and his tie straightened to an angle that suggested he suspected there would be forms later and meant to forgive himself for them in advance. Cael kept up a cheerful narration of shortcuts, half to teach and half to convince the city to be cooperative for an hour. At the cut they paused long enough to buy oranges from the woman who had laughed. For the teacher, she said, bagging them with the brisk intimacy of someone who knows who needs potassium and kindness. For the boy, for whichever official remembers to grin. I can grin, the reclaimer said, and demonstrated a small, square version of the act that, nonetheless, counted. The seam at the tram mouth kept its manners this time. The car slid up as if it had always meant to, opened its doors with no more drama than a cat admitting it had misjudged a windowsill, and carried them through the tunnel to a room that smelled like dust and questions. Mr. Ardan's classroom. On ordinary days the lab was the color of sensible. On this day the cabinet took up more air than was fair. It stood where Leo had first seen it, black oak spine, brass vertebrae for hinges, glass pane with the hair-thin circle etched on it like the idea of a moon. The straps cradled the threshold engine with attentive authority. The seam at the back was a suggestion, not yet a bad idea. Vice Principal Greaves stood near the door with a clipboard and a posture a drill sergeant would have described as promising. Her shoes had sensible heights and a faint air of wounded dignity. At her elbow hovered Ms. Patel from Facilities, who could teach a wrench etiquette. Mr. Ardan had put on a jacket with elbows that wanted sympathetic reweaving. His tie, a field of small sunflowers rebelling against the lid-gray morning. Of course, Greaves looked from the cabinet to the newcomers and took a breath that had excellent grammar. "Mr. Ardan," she said, "there appears to be a hole in your furniture." "It is a hole that knows where it lives," Mr. Ardan said. "We brought," and he glanced at each of them, naming neither names nor titles, only functions, friends who are good at sternly worded letters to reality. "Do I need to call the district?" Greaves asked. This was not a threat. It was a ritual. "You can," Cael said amiably, "but the district won't pick up until someone in authority laughs." Greaves' gaze sharpened. "That cannot possibly be an operational instruction." Nevertheless, the reclaimer murmured, "We often discover our constraints are waiting for the sound of permission disguised as joy." Greaves blinked at the bureaucrat who had said a sentence like that and had a ledger that did not appear to mind. She relented by 1 centimeter. "I will allow demonstration," she said, making a box on her clipboard for the event. "Under supervision, under protest, underwritten. I have receipts," the reclaimer offered, raising the ledger. "Of course you do," Greaves said, almost smiling despite herself. "Proceed." Rowan's tuning fork sang plain and true when Leo struck it lightly against the edge of a lab bench. The note climbed into the ceiling tiles and made dust motes remember choreography. The cabinet's etched circle brightened a fraction. The seam drew itself an outline like a child tracing the shape of a door they have been promised for their birthday. "Thirds first," Leo murmured to himself, and hummed. The fork pulsed the interval back. The seam's edges softened, not melting, agreeing. Cael set the stone bowl on the cart that usually held meters and slow resentment. 3 seeds. A pinch of salt from a packet that read, in Miss Patel's neat block letters, "For interesting problems only." Val unlooped the umbrella vault's ribbon from Leo's wrist and threaded it through the cuff's leather, then through the cabinet's strap, tying the knot with that deft, schoolteacher perfection she had borrowed from Ardan and then taught back to him. "Rest, not refuge," she said to the ribbon. "Hold, not hoard." The seam took a breath. The room held it with it. Leo set his palm over the bowl. "I am not a door," he said, so the lab could hear him. "I am a person wearing a door. We will open for the people we name and close when we need tea or algebra." The cabinet did not shudder. The seam widened to the width of a page. Air moved through it with library manners. It smelled like cardamom and solder and a market where the stall sold permission in small attractive jars. The glass circle on the cabinet glowed like a pencil deciding to become ink. Greaves' face performed an internal debate that would later be summarized as "Dear God, I hope the insurance covers metaphysics." "This is," she said carefully, "unsafe." "It is less safe when ignored," Miss Patel said, with the crisp authority of someone who had seen children and pipes both break under pressure. "We build guardrails. We teach rules. We put the bowl where the bowl belongs." Greaves looked at Leo. "Can you guarantee no one will be misplaced?" "I can guarantee I won't pretend I can do that," Leo said, throat honest. I can also guarantee we'll never let someone go alone. And that we'll file receipts here and in the place that thinks receipts are poetry." The reclaimer nodded, unexpectedly proud. "We will," he said. "I will." He set his ledger on the lab table like a placemat at a treaty. "Demonstration," Greaves said faintly, which in her mouth meant yes. Cael moved first, because that is how Cael loved, by going ahead and making the corridor feel less like embarrassment. They stepped through the seam and came back holding a paper umbrella painted with sunflowers that matched Ardan's tie. "Proof of concept," they said, and handed it to Greaves. It rained a single drop of sensible water on her clipboard, the ink held. "Again," Greaves said, and Miss Patel went next, returning with a roll of warning tape that read "Mind the anecdote." She taped the floor along the cabinet as if demarcating a magic trick they were making ethical. "Student," Greaves said, glancing at Leo. He looked at Ardan first. The man nodded once with the precise fraction of a father who has learned how to be that after he has already been a teacher. "Not because you owe me," Ardan said, low. "Because you want to." "I do," Leo said, and stepped. Harrowmark welcomed him like a room that has just been aired. He breathed lemon because that is what it means to arrive. He looked back immediately so the step would not turn into hubris. Greaves, reduced to a rectangle of sensible in a window, stared at him as if she had only now conceded there were subjects she could not set extra homework on and expected to be annoyed and was instead relieved. "Policy is hungry," Cael murmured, and Leo realized they were not talking about Greaves. The ampersands had not followed. The building kept them the way a body keeps an old vaccination scar. But a different force had slithered in with the demonstration. Not rules, but policy, the abstract cousin that smells like paperclips left in the rain. It took the form of an officious draft. It wanted to make lines where none had been requested. It wanted to staple the seam to the lesson plan. Rowan's fork hummed in thirds. The bowl sang softly under Leo's palm. "And," he said, making the conjunction on purpose, "and we will open on Tuesdays and Thursdays for supervised projects only. And the door is a door to the city and not to everything. And we write a rule that can be read out loud without it tasting like chalk." Policy hesitated. So close to being a helpful wind if only you didn't let it do your thinking for you. The reclaimer stepped a fraction closer to it and performed what, in another life, would have been called a flourish with the ledger. "Filed as practice," he said. Policy settled. You could feel the building unclench. Greaves pinched the bridge of her nose in the ecumenical gesture of administrators who have chosen to be useful instead of correct. "We will need parental permission," she said. "And a smog test. And a fire inspector. And, Leo said gently. Greaves met his eyes. The corners of her mouth nearly remembered how to lift. "And we will need cake," she said, shocking herself. She wrote it down. "For the demonstration team. And the fire inspector." "Cake is salt's friend," Cael said. "We are becoming civilized." The day rearranged to accommodate logistics. Miss Patel built a brass rail with a placard that read "Rest, not Refuge." The cabinet accepted it because the letters had been hammered by a hand that respected both nouns. The index sent over a narrow folio with slots labeled crossing name, time, purpose, whose bowl, with whom, receipt hash, best part. The reclaimer put his pen on a string. Greaves created a waiver that contained exactly one sentence, no small print. "We are responsible for one another." "Too simple?" she asked. "Perfect," vows said, in the tone of a person allowed her second lie of the day and choosing not to use it. She reached across the space between her and Ardan and took his sleeve for a heartbeat. "It fits in a pocket." Afternoon slanted. The scene behaved. Students from last period peered in, craning around the good gossip without breaking their necks. Ardan taught a condensed lesson on refraction that politely included invisible cities. Greaves stood by the cabinet and explained to two delicately horrified parents that no, we are not encouraging their children to elope with archetypes, and yes, there will be a sign-out sheet. Miss Patel drilled the rail into the floor with a noise that suggested a compromise everyone could live with. Rowan arrived last, hair pretending it had a plan, vest stitched with time signatures newer than they were yesterday. Tone check, they said, and tapped the fork. The walls of the lab answered in a low, satisfied chord. Your room hums well, Rowan told it. Be a good wall. The wall, pleased as any creature that feels seen, obliged. They walked back to Harrowmark in the blue hour with the ribbon to return. The umbrella vault took it with proprietorial fondness. Good knot, it said. Thank you for not drowning in dramatics. We try to schedule our dramatics for after cake, Cael said. Wise, said the vault. Predictable cake is a pillar of civic life. The index stamped their day with the ribbon's image and the sentence. Demonstration with witnesses, tone established, and used for grammar and ethics. The desk minder inclined her head to Leo. You have learned how to use salt or how to be used by it, she said. The difference is all the difference. Tomorrow, Vows said, turning toward a door that led her to the part of the city where promises slept in drawers and woke at dawn to stretch, I become smaller. Not gone. Less shoe, more shoelace. She smiled, and the room did a polite bow for her, the way hospitals bow for good nurses. He will still have me when he needs to say no to himself. That's what vows are for. Will you? Leo began, and then decided to be exact. Do you want that? Val looked at Ardan, at the ribbon dish, at the bowl in Leo's hands, at the reclaimer's ledger, at Cael's coat with its pockets full of practical stories. Today, she said, truth for the last time, yes. Tomorrow I want what tomorrow wants. Come fetch me if he binds himself when he ought to tie a bow. She touched Leo's cuff, one fingertip, a last adjustment to a collar. Remember. You can say and without letting anyone make you say yes. Ardan stood beside her, smaller without shrinking. Thank you, he said. You fed me, Val said. Eat, next. They took cake seriously. Harrowmark has opinions about pastry. The cafe by the Bellfounder's yard made a lemon cake worthy of a rhetoric class. They ate under strings of little lamps that had decided to form constellations in neighborhoods that needed them. The ampersands passed the window, pretending to be uninterested in frosting and failing, loops glossy with a day of not binding. The reclaimer wrote in cake in the ledger and looked embarrassed about it for exactly 1 second, then not at all. Tomorrow, Cael said to Leo, stealing the last crumb because they had done most of the actual running, we set the schedule. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we make a list of chaperones so the door is never wearing just one person. We convince the orchestra teacher to lend us her metronome for the wall. Already approved, Rowan said, wielding a fork with artisan pride. She says it will keep the tuning honest if you let the children decorate it with stickers only after they learn to count out loud without rolling their eyes. Greaves? Ardan asked. Has already phoned the fire inspector, Miss Patel said, satisfied. He laughed. We are within the law's fondest hopes. Thank you, Leo said into the cake, because gratitude tastes best with citrus. You're not finished, the reclaimer said, but not as a warning. As an invitation, he wasn't. The next morning, the index sent over a slim book with a title he could not quite read until he set his palm on it. field guide to doors that think they're people, and people who know better. The orchestra delivered small chimes and a brass plate engraved with the sentence "Mean it." Greaves ordered a sign that said no full names past this point and a smaller one that said "Bring your own lemon." The ampersands drafted an addendum that, to everyone's shock, read simply, "And we will wait 2 beats longer." On the first official crossing, 6 students signed North, Ren, Scissors, maybe, 8th, Blue. They drank air flavored with lemon and did not faint. They went to the stair and wrote something that made them feel less like drafts. They came back with a map of how to apologize to a wall they had bumped into and a string of silence from the stall that sold it for making a test feel like a conversation. On the second, the weather office sent over the young woman who had once been filed and now kept barometers from lying. "I brought a bar of soap for the lab sinks," she said, "and a way to talk about pressure to people who think pressure is only for parents." She showed them how to hold the bowl without letting fear tip it, told them to sprinkle salt like they were seasoning their own attention, smiled one of those smiles that says worse things have happened and I am not in them anymore. The floor learned the metronome. The wall stopped sulking about its paint. The cabinet, dignified, let itself be the door the room chose instead of the problem someone ignored. Greaves wrote to the district. The district wrote back the way the district always does, and Greaves wrote again even more correctly. The index stamped each crossing with a little sunflower until Ardan finally wore a tie that matched the weather. On purpose? Leo asked him, on a Tuesday when the sky was kind and the lab smelled like graphite and truancy. Almost, Ardan said. He had a piece of chalk on his ear he had not noticed. "We are learning to be on purpose people. It's harder than I expected and more fun than I worried." Vows' voice lived now where polished wood keeps scuffs from becoming wounds. Leo heard her when a rule wanted to become furniture. Ardan heard her when a promise wanted to become a cage. The reclaimer leaned in doorways like a punctuation mark that had decided to be open-minded. Cael showed up whenever a shortcut tried to skip over kindness and made it go back and relearn the sentence. On a Friday, Leo returned the bowl to Rowan to have the hairline scratches polished out. Rowan turned it in their hands with the satisfaction of someone who appreciates honest work. "How's the hum?" they asked. "Good," Leo said. "Sometimes the wall laughs first." "Then you've done it," Rowan said. "You've tuned a room." On a Tuesday a boy tried to say his full name because he wanted to be seen all at once. Leo put the fork in his hand and said, "Hum thirds," and the boy did, and the room held him without needing to swallow him whole. On a Thursday an ampersand loitered by the cabinet and left a sticky note that said "I'm proud of you" in tidy loops. Greaves framed it between 2 policies. On an ordinary morning, Leo stopped on the landing of the stair and listened to his breath meet the city's. The bowl at the top held new names in careful handwriting. The air tasted freshly squeezed. The dog made of shadows yawned and allowed exactly 1 ear to be scratched. North, Cael said beside him, deliberately using the day name because today was for that. "Happy Tuesday. Ready to be greedy again?" "I choose and," Leo said, and the city, never tired of a good conjunction, let the word run along her rails. He walked the long way to school. In the lab, the cabinet waited without sulking. A ribbon lay in the drawer for when the weather needed reminding that it could be kind. The metronome on the wall ticked its 7 and its 3 and its sweep without a hint of boredom. Greaves had placed the cake order already. Miss Patel had labeled the salt, for interesting problems only, and no one was misusing the definition. Ardan ran through the demonstration one more time before first period, then looked at Leo and performed the smallest bow a teacher can give a student without knocking down the furniture of authority. "Lead," he said. Leo did. He struck the fork. He set his palm. He meant it. The seam opened the exact distance it should and no farther. The room breathed. A dozen teenagers became a choir that did not sing but counted, and in counting learned to keep one another from falling through the wrong part of a sentence. They filed their receipt. The index stamped it with a sunflower and, for reasons none of them would ever stop enjoying, a small cake. At the end of the day, after the last bell, after Greaves had decanted policy back into sense and Miss Patel had kissed the rail with a wrench and Ardan had arranged chalk in a line correct enough to be restful, Leo sat on the bench by the cabinet, listening for the hum he had learned to trust. He heard the city under it, which was not less. He heard the wall, which thought well of itself now and deserved to. He heard his own breath. He heard the word he had chosen make room for him again. And the door did not own him. He wore it on purpose, the way you wear a coat you are not ashamed to lend. He belonged on both sides. He had receipts. He had a bowl, a fork, a ribbon, a ledger with room for cake, a teacher who had learned how to be brave without being alone, a principal with a sensible clipboard and a laugh she was beginning to trust. A city that said hello even when he said North or Leo or no. He closed the cabinet gently so it would know it was being respected. The etched circle dimmed to its usual ghost. Outside, the sky and his teacher's tie matched by accident, which is the only way that trick should work. The floor stopped pretending to be less than a boat. The day rolled forward on old rails it had decided to keep. He took a breath. The room kept time. And for once, the word after didn't mean away, it meant also.